Hey there, everybody. Guess what? It's that time again. It's time for another episode of Life Downloaded Live. And as always, myself, Dan Edge, is joined by my amazing podcast wife, the lovely Samantha Renk. How are you doing, Sam?
No, I'm really well, thank you. I was just doing a really weird dance. And I said I'm trying to do like some aerobics every night. So this is the swimming.
There you go. Yeah, do the swim.
I don't know whether it helps because every day I kind of get into the German Christmas biscuits and I just have about 20 of them and then I do 20 minutes of cardio and I'm like, that's fine. That's going to help my immune system. It's okay. They don't count anymore.
I did see that you were on the German Christmas biscuits. Instagram is a wondrous thing.
My goodness me. Like they are very, very addictive and goddamn you little stores for bringing Christmas biscuits in at the beginning of November.
Other supermarkets with Christmas biscuits are available, just to BBC.
They are. I'm cursing all of you. All of you. How dare you? I think it was actually October. It wasn't even November. It was in October. I mean, for goodness sake.
Well, at the end of the day, we're at that time in 2020, because it's been a year. It's been a heck of a year that I think nobody is going to begrudge you Christmas biscuits.
Well, I mean, look at the state of me. Look. I mean, I've just lost the will to live nowadays. I have showered. And if this is what I look like after a shower, there's no helping me, is there really? Once the fashionista, now I'm rocking this.
At least we know you're clean and fresh. That's the thing.
Just about.
Now, for those of you that are observant watching us here live on Life Downloaded, those of you that are catching up on podcast obviously can't see unless you have some kind of superpowers. There is a wondrous third face underneath us.
Who is this?
Look at this. This stranger waving at us in a box. Sam, you know who this lovely gentleman is, so would you care to give him a tremendous introduction to our Life Downloaded audience?
I mean, you say that I know him. He just kind of follows me around a little bit. You know, he keeps turning up at my door, trying to sell me Tupperware. And I keep going, not today, Nick. Don't want any Tupperware, thank you very much. I can get mine on eBay. Fine. So this is a lovely, lovely Nick. And I know Nick through Habinteg. And Habinteg, well, we're going to talk about Habinteg today, but mine and Nick's relationship has blossomed because of our passion in life, so to speak. And our passion is to be a champion for accessible homes. Because I know that I've spoken quite a lot, I think, in the past about my own journey. And, you know, I'm going to touch upon that again today for anyone who's new to the podcast. I am a wheelchair user. I moved to London 9 years ago. And in my very fairy tale almost naive mind, I thought moving around my own country would be a piece of cake. And the fact that I would need an accessible house or even a home where I could make it accessible would be a piece of cake, particularly in a lovely city like London. Oh, how I was wrong, Dan. Oh, how I was wrong.
Well, this is it. I mean, you know... You and your lovely fairy tale naivety, and the world in general, I think, don't understand how inaccessible the world is. And we often talk about the social model here on Life Downloaded. Those of you that have listened or watched our past episodes will be probably well aware of the social model by now. If you're not, we can tell you about it. But I think...
Go on, Dan. Give us a summary of the social model.
Oh, see, now you're putting me on the spot.
I've already done mine today. I did a podcast earlier for someone I was a guest. So I've done the social model. So you do your social model and I'll do mine, and we'll see which one's best.
Oh, well, you see, this is the thing. I'm slightly disturbed at the fact you've cheated on us with another podcast and you didn't tell me what's this about.
Hey.
How could you? But Sam, just to say thanks so much for that very kind and generous introduction. And I'm really excited.
You're my stalker.
I'm really happy to be with you today because your podcast is brilliant, and I'm very much looking forward to talking about accessible homes and maybe even Tupperware when we get to the end.
And maybe even Tupperware. Where has Tupperware gone?
I don't know. You started the the Tupperware thing, not
Where,
me.
but where is,
To
oh
deny
my God, I
trying to
remember
tell
growing up with Tupperware everywhere. Tupperware everywhere. But Nick, do you know that you know the social model as well, don't you?
Yeah, that's something that you know Habinteg kind of think is really important. And you know, when we talk a bit about the work we're doing, and when I come on and hopefully say a bit about the Centre for Accessible Environments, that's all very much about how can we make sure our communities are fully accessible, and you know, making sure that our built environment around us isn't the thing that's kind of creating a kind of barrier to disabled people.
Right, we're jumping the gun because we're assuming everyone knows what the social model means. Dan,
Okay.
I'm going to mute you in a minute, Nick. I'm joking, my love. This is how we treat all our guests, with absolute disrespect.
Disrespect, disdain, and then we realise how wonderful they are. No, in all seriousness, okay, for those of you that aren't aware, that haven't listened to all our previous podcasts, social model in a really quick nutshell basically says disabled people are not disabled by their impairment. So for me, that's cerebral palsy. For Sam, that's brittle bones. For various other people, they have various different impairments depending on their own needs. We're not disabled by that. We are in fact disabled by the fact that the environment around us isn't built accessibly. So for example, in my own house, where I have some adaptations that I need, I can do more than if I was in somebody else's house where those adaptations are not there. So I'm disabled by the fact that I'm not in an environment that's adapted. Also, there's a second strand about people's attitudes disabling us. So saying, oh, you're a wheelchair user, you can't be a basketball player, you can't be an astronaut, you can't be, or whatever your impairment may be, whatever your goal may be. Sorry, what was that, Sam?
A great lover.
A great mother, I'm sure.
Lover.
Oh, lover.
And a mother.
I was going to say, well, Sam, you as a lover, like
I know, right?
The men are very lucky. That's all I'm saying.
I know, but that is a great segue, because how Dan has described the social model is exactly where I find myself now. And often when I explain the social model, when I'm on other podcasts or on the television, I use Habinteg as an example, because I'm currently living in central London, very, very swanky part. And that is all because I was given the opportunity to have an adapted apartment by Habinteg. So when
it's as if we planned it. No,
I know, as if we planned this. So how I describe it is my impairment, as Dan said, is brittle bones. You can put me on the moon, you can put me anywhere. That's never going to change. But my environment disables me. So in my own home, which is a lovely Habinteg flat, I'm fully self-sufficient. I've got automatic doors, I've got automatic windows. The doors are wider, I've got a wet room. The kitchen is on hydraulics, so it kind of goes up and down. So in my own flat, I do not have a disability. Of course, I've got my impairment, but as soon as I come out of my flat, that's where the problems start. You know, insufficient drop curbs, lack of public transport that's accessible. So without further ado, because poor Nick's going, I'm running out of my coffee. Nick, you are from lovely Habinteg. First of all, I mean, I'm sure people might get an idea what Habinteg is, but what is Habinteg? What do you guys do, and what exactly is your role in Habinteg?
Great, so thanks, Sam. So I'm one of the directors at Habinteg. I've been at the organisation for 2 years, and before that I was at a brilliant charity called Muscular Dystrophy UK. I know they're an organisation that you're both really familiar with. And Habinteg, we're a direct provider of social housing. We've been around for about 50 years now. This year is our 50th anniversary, which is very exciting.
Do you sing happy birthday to organisations? I don't know. Happy birthday, Habinteg.
We have about 3,500 homes right across England, working in about 80 different local authorities. And you know what makes Habinteg quite different as a housing association is we've got a real focus on accessible homes and independent living, as you kind of summarised really well at the start, Sam. And I suppose kind of going back to when the organisation started, we actually were formed together with a charity that's now known as Scope, before then becoming a separate organisation. And what we were proposing 50 years ago was actually quite kind of cutting edge and quite different at the time, because we believed then, as we do now, that disabled people should be living alongside able-bodied people in, communities that are inclusive and accessible, whereas 50 years ago, it was perhaps more common for disabled people to be segregated in accessible homes elsewhere. So actually, that those ideas we were championing at the time were, as I said, quite kind of different and unique. So I suppose that's a bit about us as an organisation. But again, what makes us quite different is we're also campaigning. So we realise that we can't provide the amount of accessible homes that are needed right across the country. So we're trying to put pressure on government to change policy to make sure all new homes are accessible and adaptable. And hopefully, I know perhaps we can chat a bit more about the kind of campaigning side of things a bit later on. I suppose just one other element I wanted to share about Habinteg that makes us a bit different. We've got an expert team of consultants called the Centre for Accessible Environments, and they're a group that actually help organisations understand the social model of disability, that help organisations make sure their services are fully accessible. So, we work with public sector organisations, large companies, corporations, doing things like virtual training, helping people on the design of their buildings as well. So in a nutshell, that's a bit about the organisation. I think what makes us a bit different from a number of other housing associations out there. But as Sam, as you said really well at the beginning, I think kind of the key part is that idea about accessibility, accessible environments and inclusive homes.
My door's going. Can you go? Can you carry on?
See, proof that Life Downloaded is live is the fact.
Live. Could it be somebody selling Tupperware, as Sam accused me?
That would be ironic, wouldn't it?
That would be great. I could
if it's somebody selling Tupperware, I'm buying a lottery ticket straight away.
Yeah, Nick, thank you for that introduction. And I think I just wanted to pick up on one of the points you made about, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
We're looking at the DDA, and the DDA, Disability Discrimination Act, it only just turned 25. So it's only been 25 years since the disability community actually had a law saying that, hey, we matter. We deserve some sort of equality. And I think, people who are maybe non-disabled who might be tuning in or, kind of listening a little bit later on, like why wasn't this done a long time ago? Why weren't we making more accessible buildings? But as you rightly said, unfortunately, because of attitudinal barriers, as Dan pointed out at the beginning, we weren't deemed to be part of a society. We often lived at home with parents. We were institutionalized, So yeah, there was sorry, someone's just knocking on my door, but I think it's a parcel. They could just leave it there. It's fine.
Is it Tupperware? Is what I was saying.
It might be Tupperware, but it can't be you because you're there.
It can't be me.
I'm
Exactly.
Two places at once. See, he secretly has superpowers. That's all I'm saying.
So Nick, you said that there's 3,500 Habinteg properties. That's across the UK. Now that sounds like quite a substantial amount, but actually, let's break that down. In the great scheme of things, you've really just touched the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, with regards to demand for accessible houses. So can you kind of tell our listeners the landscape of, what does that look like? Like how many homes across the UK are accessible or meet access requirements, and what are those basic requirements?
Sure. Thanks, Sam. Really good question there. And as you say, in terms of the number of homes that Habinteg provide, we kind of clearly can't kind of create enough accessible homes for everybody. We know in the UK there are about 1.2 million wheelchair users, but when we look at our current housing stock, we know that across the country, just 9% of homes are kind of deemed visitable from disabled people. So they don't have those kind of basic requirements that would mean disabled people can kind of simply visit friends and family. Habinteg also ran a YouGov poll about a year or so ago when we asked people, would you be able to invite a wheelchair user to your house for a cup of tea, for example? Would someone be able to pop in and visit? And, the vast majority of people said, no, that wouldn't be possible because that person would not be able to access everywhere in the home, may not be able to use the bathroom, for example. So in terms of the evidence and the statistics out there, we know that there is a real problem, there's a challenge. There aren't enough accessible homes out there. We also know that 400,000 wheelchair users, we believe, are living in homes that are neither adapted nor accessible. So certainly the evidence is telling us there is a problem, and that's why in terms of that campaigning work I mentioned, we want to make sure we see some changes. And what we want to see ideally is for all new homes to be built to what are known as accessible and adaptable standards, very similar to what was known as the lifetime home model. And effectively what that really means is, as people's needs change, as families perhaps get older, then a home can adapt and change with families' needs. So that might mean things like grab rails can be installed more easily, and there's enough space for people to move around. So we want to make sure that all those new homes are accessible and adaptable. And Sam, I know this is something that we met with the Equalities Minister about a year or so ago.
Oh, yeah.
Penny Mordaunt, and who's actually now, she's not the Equalities Minister, but she's still in government. So I'm sure that's someone we could probably go and talk to again.
Oh, totally. She follows me on Instagram. Well, like that.
There you go.
Yeah.
No, seriously, Sam, I have got so I think there is something that you might be able to post on Instagram to get her involved again. Because what I also wanted to mention is, that there is a bit of light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to accessible homes. And what do I mean by that? Well, in September, the government announced a consultation about whether or not to make sure all new homes are accessible and adaptable. So what we're trying to do now is encourage as many people as possible to respond to that consultation. So the deadline's on the 1st of December. The government will say they'll respond to that in March next year. So hopefully, if enough people respond, if enough people explain why this is a really important issue, the government in March could actually change those regulations to make sure all new homes in England are accessible and adaptable. So, I think there's a bit of a kind of campaigning role that we'll need to push forward with in the coming weeks. So certainly I'd encourage your kind of viewers and listeners to go onto our website. We've got a guide in terms of how to respond to that consultation, share it on social media. Let's try and get Penny Mordaunt involved again. But yeah, it's really important we try
and Dan can put the Habinteg website onto the screen so it comes up now. Dan, are you go do your techie stuff now?
Do my techie stuff. Okay, well,
this is what we paid you for.
This is unplanned techie stuff, so bear with me.
Unplanned techie stuff. But I mean, that's really exciting news, and it's something, you and I, Nick, have been to Parliament on a number of occasions to really push this initiative, and for me to tell my story, of how important it is just to feel like you are independent and, don't have to rely on others. And that can be simply by having very small tweaks. I call them tweaks to homes, and whenever I kind of talk to people who don't really have anything to do with disabled people, I suppose, about the importance of having more inclusive designs, they often just don't understand why it would be important. And then I raise the point that, well, first of all, we've got an aging population. People are getting older. My mum is a nurse and she works in dementia clinics, and she tells me how expensive it is, to be in a care facility. Wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to, as we get older, maybe we, have a hip replacement, maybe we have other kind of impairments that come along with just getting a little bit old. Wouldn't it be great for you to physically be able to adapt your property or to stay in your property, and be in a very safe environment? I mean, for me, it's really funny you said not being able to go to other people's houses. Yeah. And it might sound really basic, but, for me, I always find that I'm the host with my friends. Yeah. Now, there's obviously the positives to that. At least I know that I've got an accessible bathroom. I don't need to worry about finding, if I drink too much wine, I at least I've got my own toilet. But on the flip side, as we're all finding now, being in lockdown, it's not so easy being in your own four walls constantly. It's nice to go out and about. And I think because there's such a shortfall of accessible homes, what you'll find is people end up coming to you. You end up being the host. You end up potentially spending more money because you're the host. You end up not really going out and being social because you're in your own adapted home. And also for me, like on a very personal level, it's even impacted the way I go around dating. I always think, my goodness, if I end up going on dates or if I start being in a relationship with someone, there's no guarantee that I'd be able to go and visit them in their home. So you can be left quite vulnerable in your own home, because that is where everybody comes to you. And I think sometimes, even though I'm quite a sociable person, sometimes I just want to be left alone in my own house. But I'm not given that option because I'm quite limited as to where I can go and visit. Yeah. So for some people that might not seem like a big thing. And I'm sure some people might think, my goodness, what's she moaning about? She's got a lovely, accessible home, which is completely true. But, just having that, being allowed to physically go and move place to place and have that mobility, really is a privilege. Even, if I were to start a family, I wouldn't be able to stay in this home because it's not big enough for a child. So, there's all these things that go through my mind. And even with my career, what if I need to move for my career? How, they wouldn't be so straightforward. So I think there's a lot to be said about having more accessible homes. It's not just about providing that stability. It's about, having your independence being given back to you. Sorry, I just rambled on quite a lot.
It's a really good point, Sam. And it's really, really interesting, a couple of things that you said there, because Habinteg's insight group, where we've kind of brought together disabled people to kind of focus around this issue. It's kind of interesting talking to people about how they went about finding an accessible home. And actually they said that a lot of the things that other people might have put at the top of their list in terms of the local area, would they like to live there? A lot of the disabled people we spoke to said actually all of that was just chucked out the window, and it just had to be simply enough, could they get in? Is it accessible? And if they were lucky, could they see if there's an accessible tube station or bus station nearby? But actually, when it came to amenities, local area, did they, want to live in that part of the world? They said actually they weren't able to take that on board. It was solely about, is it accessible or not?
Yeah. I mean, even just, is it big enough to have your equipment? I was gifted a wheelchair. I'm a manual chair user normally. But, I was gifted by the British Bone Society an electric power chair. And, power chairs are big and bulky. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And luckily, I've got two big double cupboards in the hallway. And I actually put the power chair in there, So it's even thinking about really minute details of, what about a carer? If you have a carer, where will they stay if you do have to have overnight care? So there's so much that needs to be thought about that people probably do take for granted. Yeah. And I love working with Habinteg, and I love what you do, not only because, you have allowed me to live independently and I wouldn't say you gave me this house. It's not my house. I rent. Give me the house.
They gifted you the house. That's gonna be one heck of a...
You heard it here first. Nick says that Habinteg's giving me the house. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for that. No, I am a tenant. I pay rent. Yes, but yes, Danny boy, have you got a lovely question for Nick? Because I realise that I'm sick of my own voice right now. Well, I'm sure everyone else is.
Well,
no, not at all,
I'm just contemplating how big that Instagram ad will have to be when you go, thank you, Habinteg, for gifting me my house.
I know, right?
That's what I'm thinking about right now. But on a serious point, for those of you that can see the screen, if you saw text flash up, it's because I was instructed to do last-minute text things. But the address of Habinteg is now on the screen. It's www.habinteg, which is spelled habinteg.org.uk. It's on the screen if you're watching live. We'll put it in the information of the podcast when it goes live on all the podcast platforms. So if you want to know about Habinteg, they are there and you can find them, and you can join the campaign for more accessible houses all over the country so that, disabled people can live in different places by choice rather than by necessity, which is a valid point.
And do we have any questions? Let's have a look.
Well, we've had one. from the lovely Adam Pearson, who we love and know dearly.
Adam.
He's popped in and he said, how can we call out inaccessibility without coming across as difficult? And that's always a challenge for disabled people. You, as Habinteg, do you have any advice on how to call things out that are inaccessible?
It's a good question, Dan. And I think, we'd always encourage people to speak out about those things. And actually, if it does mean being difficult, then I think that is the right thing to do in terms of making sure that things are fully accessible for everybody. So, I think the key point to mention is probably the Equality Act from 2010, and that's really the kind of law that puts that duty on organisations to make sure that reasonable adjustments are carried out to make sure that disabled people aren't placed at a substantial disadvantage when accessing a particular service. And when businesses or organisations do make changes, then that means that things are more accessible for their customers and makes things much more accessible for disabled people using that service. So it could be things like providing information in an accessible format. It might be providing a service in a different part of the building, for example. So absolutely, I think it is important people kind of talk about those things, and it can be done in a way that's kind of quite constructive and clear. It doesn't have to be about, necessarily going to the local press or creating a huge complaint. It could simply just be
Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. Just Instagram and Twitter. It could just be writing a simple letter about the challenge that service user had about accessing that service and reminding them about the Equality Act and asking what steps they'd take to address some of those challenges. So I think that's probably the advice that I would give on that. Definitely quote the Equality Act and put your concerns in writing and get in touch with them.
I completely agree, and I think I always say that, other people's, normally non-disabled people, that they let their egos get in the way of real change. Like whenever someone like myself or Dan or Adam kind of say, hey, we're not happy with this, or what are you going to do about this, or, your policy sucks, we're often met with a little bit of hostility, and that is because people don't particularly like being told what they're doing wrong, So I think for change to happen, people need to leave their egos, I suppose, at the door and to realise, well, that's the word that I keep using at the moment, targeted universalism. If we make policies on a universal scale, we still need to look at individual needs, and by looking at universal policies through minority groups' eyes, we actually benefit the whole of society, and that's exactly what you guys are doing. If in 10 years' time, every single building had to meet specific accessibility requirements, can you imagine how that's going to benefit? Everybody and anybody.
Good point, Sam. I thought you wrote about that really well in your Metro.
Why, thank you.
A few days ago, I thought it was a really good article. And I mentioned the Centre for Accessible Environments earlier, our in-house team of experts, and actually groups like the C can help organisations in order to make sure their premises are fully accessible. So actually, there is that support out there for people to provide online training, tips, advice, telling people about the legislation, and offering some of that support and guidance. So, I think you're right, Sam. I think that was a good summary. And
as always, I speak the best advice ever.
You do. You speak the lingo.
I speak the lingo. Now, you mentioned like the requirements that are it's standard or what you're pushing for. But what does that look like? So I mentioned my home. My home has had quite bespoke adaptations done, so I got a grant from my local authority. But to begin with, the home had wider doors, lower light switches, higher plug sockets. The wet room was already installed. So there's things that were standard. So what does it look like? So what, in an ideal world, what Habinteg's pushing for?
Yeah. So,
what would that look like?
Yeah. And also, just before you answer that, this ties into a very nice question that we've just had in from Sandra Bentley on Instagram.
Oh, hello, Sandra.
The joys of an Apple Watch means I get to see this while we're live. And she asks, what is the minimum requirement for adaptations normally? Widened doorways seem sufficient for most builders. So, in essence, what's the minimum requirements right now, and what are Habinteg pushing for?
Yeah.
Sure. So, Sam, just going back to your point there, in terms of what we're pushing for, is that standard I mentioned earlier that we described as the accessible and adaptable standard, or kind of the homes that are known as category 2 homes. And by that, we mean things like level access. You mentioned the plug sockets at the level that would provide easy access. We'd want to see walls in that home to make sure that adaptations can be installed much more easily and quickly. Things like stair lifts could be provided much more cheaply and better. And again, enough circulation space, enough space for wheelchair users to move around freely and easily, and then things like door widths as well, making sure that they are at the right space to make sure that everybody can use them. So that's known as the category 2, or accessible and adaptable standard. So that's what we're pushing for. That's what we want all homes to meet. And it is actually the case in somewhere like London. So in London, all new homes are required to meet that standard. And that's why we think it should be rolled out everywhere. So that's hopefully answers your question, Sam.
I mean, it's not a lot though, is it? Like, you know what I mean? You're not asking for a lot. If you think about it, that is very, I mean, it's very beneficial adaptations, but they're not crazy, you're not asking for a glass elevator, although I would love one of them. You know what I mean? Like, it's nothing too, for me anyway, in my eyes, it's quite a minimalist.
Yeah. And I think, Sam, it's also that point. I think it goes back to the question that was just asked. It's about making sure those homes are future-proofed, so adaptations can be then kind of built in when people's needs change. But in terms of those kind of very basic standards, so I've spoken around kind of category 2, but in terms of the very basic level, it's category 1, then that future-proofing isn't actually built in. So those homes aren't as easy to adapt as people's needs change. So although that kind of basic criteria that I think the question linked to kind of does talk about level access and sufficiently wide doorways, the category 1 is actually more lenient about allowing exceptions. So it's a bit more easier for those things to be avoided. So that means that homes often don't end up with that step-free access or amenities that can be used easily. So there's a bit more wriggle room, which is why we want to make sure that all new homes are built to that accessible and adaptable standard.
And it's why the campaign is so important. San on YouTube says they worry that house builders get out of social housing already. Will litigation be compulsory? So I think that's the whole point of the campaign, is to try and make it compulsory by law that houses reach that level 2 standard.
That's right, because I think one thing that developers actually tell us is if there was a level playing field, then that would be much more easy to implement. So actually, if all new homes were built to those standards I mentioned, then everybody's on equal footing, and there's perhaps less of a challenge within the sector. And I suppose the point about cost sometimes comes up. If there's a bit of a myth out there that, well, hang on, it surely costs more to build homes that are accessible and adaptable. I mean, we know that in terms of a typical dwelling, to build to those accessible and adaptable standards costs just about £1,200 per property. So imagine in terms of the costs that go into building a home and selling that home, think about those kind of developers, and that's actually very tiny marginal costs. So we don't believe that people can turn around and say, oh, it costs too much to build to these standards.
Yeah, it's more about the intent rather than the ability or the cost. I mean, you look at even aviation, having a slightly bigger bathroom on board an aeroplane, a lot of people and ah about it, go, oh, we can't yet. We've got bars, we've got futons, we've got, lie down beds on aircraft, but we can't give a bathroom 6 more inches, to make it accessible. So I think half the battle is, and it's again what we started this podcast off saying it, you know, physical barriers are just as damaging as attitudinal barriers and vice versa.
It's a good point, Sam. And I'd also encourage, you know, the people that have been asking questions today is, you know, make sure you respond to that government consultation, because, you know, those really important points you mentioned, get them down in writing, tell the government what you think. You know, the more people that do that, the more likely we'll see that change to regulations that we've been pushing for.
Indeed.
So they can do that by contacting their local MP. Is that what you're suggesting? Write to them.
So yeah, that's a good point, Sam. I think the first thing we'd suggest people do is go onto the government's website or come onto our website, and we can direct you to it to find that Accessible Homes consultation. So you can respond to that consultation just by simply filling out some questions through an online survey. And we've also got a bit of guidance on the website to help people understand the questions. There's some tips and advice about how people might want to respond. So first thing people should do, respond to the consultation. Second thing, as you mentioned, Sam, absolutely write to your MP. I think what we're finding at the moment, it's a bit easier to get meetings with local MPs because things are online now. Don't necessarily have to kind of go to a constituency office. People can have those meetings on Zoom pretty quickly. So that's the second thing I'd advise, you know, write to your MP, ask for a meeting so you can talk about accessible homes. And then the final point I'd add is, as we're doing today, share this on social media, spread the message, tell people to respond to the consultation. It's only when we kind of got everybody talking with one voice, we can actually get see change happen.
Indeed. Another question that's just quickly come through, well, a statement really. San on YouTube says they contacted a builder about a wet room and they wanted to charge them £30,000 to install it. They're now going to contact their MP and talk about this legislation, so that's positive.
Yeah.
That's good.
Outside of, because obviously Habinteg, I'm sure, work with many partner organisations as well. If people are looking for getting current properties adapted, do you have any advice in terms of that from Habinteg or of organisations you can signpost to?
It's a good question, Dan. I think if there's anyone out there that's you know, perhaps struggling to find an accessible home, you know, one thing we'd suggest is make sure you contact your local authority and speak to the housing team, and you might be able to sign up to something known as choice-based lettings, if that is available in a local authority area, when you can look at properties available and see if they're accessible or not. I think in terms of people needing adaptations in their current homes, I suggest you speak to your local housing occupational therapist and perhaps ask if you can have an assessment for a disabled facilities grant. So councils can provide up to £30,000 funding to help with adaptations and aids as well. Again, if there are any tenants out there, tenants of housing associations, speak to them directly, because housing associations often do hold their own relatively small budgets, but they can also provide helpful aids and adaptations. And then just my last point on that, Dan, would probably be, you know, some other organisations out there offering really helpful tips and advice. I'd say the Citizens Advice Bureau has some really helpful advice around housing. Shelter is, I think, really good as well in terms of navigating around the place. And then that last organisation, in terms of just your local council, make sure you speak to the housing team, make sure you speak to the OT as well.
That's all good. All sound advice. And I think, you know, unfortunately, you know, my journey was tough, and it took years and years and years to be in a very secure place. So, you know, it does take persistence. It does take a lot of phone calling. It does take a lot of, hey, excuse me, I am here. Do not ignore me. You know, I know that is quite intimidating for a lot of people. But all I can say is there are organisations like Habinteg, there are campaigners like myself who are, you know, doing our best to kind of raise more awareness. So please don't give up too much hope, in the sense of, you know, if you find you're not able to get on the property ladder, I just, you know, I'd say just be really persistent, and don't let anyone kind of fob you off. That's the word, nice northern, fob you off, you know, just, you deserve to have an independent life, and you're not being a burden. You're not asking too much from wanting that. So stick with it, because it, you know, it took me took me 6 years to get where I am. I know that sounds quite shocking for some people to hear, but it's worth, it is worth the wait, so to speak. I mean, there's so much more, Dan and Nick, we could talk about. Even the benefit system that kind of discriminates, so we can't, save up enough money to even get on the property ladder. That is definitely something after lockdown. It's something that I myself am going to be campaigning against. Is this capped benefit system, so that people just can't progress.
No.
But that's probably another podcast for another day.
Indeed, that's a podcast all of its own.
It really, really is. I mean, Nick, I've thoroughly enjoyed seeing your beautiful face, first of all, because it's been a while.
Thank you. You're too kind.
And yeah, I'm sure we'll be celebrating in Parliament with champagne, although you won't be pushing my wheelchair, because if I remember, you're not very good after a couple of champagnes pushing a wheelchair.
We'll have to not.
If I remember.
I was also going to say, I think we might have run out of time, so we probably haven't got time to talk about the policeman and the incident around. I think what was it, going out on the terrace or something?
I just had a flashback.
See, that's how you finish a podcast. You leave them wanting more.
Nearly getting thrown out of Parliament. That's what happened.
There you go.
That's what happened. But I got Nick into a lot of trouble at Parliament. But on that note, we are going to share the shizzle out of this. Our lovely technician and boy wonder, Dan Edge.
That would be me.
Is going to, or Batman as we now see, is going to somehow, I don't know what he does, technical things. Got to get this onto our official website so that you can watch it or listen to it over and over and over again. But once that's all there, we'll be sharing it, we'll be pushing it, you guys can push it, and we'll also on our social media platforms, we will share the Habinteg page so people can, join any of these initiatives and campaigns that you've mentioned. Nick, I think you looked at your clock then, so I'm going.
No, I didn't look. I haven't got. It's not true because I haven't known. Look, this is terrible. Look, no watch. See,
you look like a bad magician now, Nick. It's like, look, nothing up my sleeves.
Honest to God, you're a good sport. Thank you. I've actually learned a lot today.
Indeed, as have I.
Genuinely, I really have. I've really
enjoyed it. It's been great to be here. Thanks very much for the kind invitation. Hopefully you will invite me back one day.
I'm sure we will.
And put you on the spot there.
Just to show you,
free to say no.
I'm sure we will, Nick. And just to show you, San on YouTube has said big thank you for all the good advice. So they're obviously going to go and make use of advice you've given. That is the power of social media, podcast, live streaming, life downloaded. We give you advice. Well, people that know give you advice.
People that know their stuff give you advice.
We just kind of sit here and look pretty. But no, Nick, it's been amazing to have you on. But if I know Sam's bladder about now, it's probably...
You know what? I was just thinking exactly. What is wrong with me? I've got like...
to think you were trying to put the blame on me looking at my watch.
I know, I've licked it. I swear my bladder's the size of a walnut, which is not big. That tea has gone right through me. So on that note, true to form, we are going to say farewell. Again, honestly, hand on heart, it was fantastic. For probably one of the best chats I've had in a very long time. So thank you, Nick.
Thank you. See you very soon.
Bye. Thank you everyone for tuning in.
Remember, guys, it's habinteg.org.uk, habinteg.org.uk. We'll put the links in all the descriptions and so on. Take care of yourselves, look after one another, and we'll see you next episode.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.